We want to welcome everyone back. This is our first lesson in a series. We've done the introduction. We're going to be talking about young people in the Bible that showed tremendous amounts of faith.
Yeah.
And so, who are we starting out with today?
We'll be starting with Daniel.
Okay.
Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as we know them.
So, as we know, Daniel was taken captive at a very young age. Do we know about how young?
There's no direct example in the scriptures of where we find out his age, but just going by what we read in the scriptures, that he most probably was between 13 and 18. He's probably a teenager.
Between 13 and 18?
Yeah.
Okay. And he was captive most of his life, wasn't he?
Pretty much all his life.
All of his life.
We find in the scriptures that he remained in the title that he'll be eventually put in until the first year of Darius or Cyrus the king. So he stayed in that position for a long period of time. We know that throughout the history of the Babylonians, after the death of Nebuchadnezzar, we have other kings that ruled up to the time of the final few years of the Babylonian empire.
Okay. So where do we want to start with?
Well, I think looking at Daniel before, we really don't know a whole lot. But if we know between the ages of 13 and 18, Daniel probably grew up at the end of the time of the Reformation of King Josiah. And we know Josiah come in there. He's one of the ones that we'll talk about in a later study. But we know that Josiah come in and how that he brought about a reformation for the people of Judah. They had fallen so far away from the Lord under King Manasseh and the things that he had brought in as a king. But yet, when we look at Daniel, we see a young man that no doubt had an experience of what it was to be faithful to God. And for us as parents, it's very, we need to be very cautious. A lot of times the kids don't hear what we say, but yet they will mimic our actions. Mm-hmm. And so I think Daniel was one of those, not only that was taught, but I believe, he probably mimicked the actions of his parents, but yet it seems like his parents taught him well concerning the things of God. Because here's a young man that knows what it is to be defiled and not defiled. As we get into the scriptures in the first chapter of Daniel.
Okay. So we're going to start right in chapter 1.
Yeah, we'll begin with verse 3 of Daniel chapter 1. We find here that when Nebuchadnezzar had come into the city of Jerusalem and to besiege it, this is during the first time that he come in. We know that Nebuchadnezzar made 3 campaigns into the city of Jerusalem, to the city of Jerusalem. And of course, on that third campaign is when he completely destroyed the city, destroyed the temple. During the second campaign, we see Ezekiel being brought into Babylon. But during his first campaign, he really didn't bring a lot of people out per se like he does in the next 2 campaigns. This time he brought about the fairest, the wisest, the choice young men and women, especially the young men that we find in the city. Because he gives commandment to the master of his eunuchs that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of princes. So he brought out those that were what we would consider probably of an elite status. And yet here we see Daniel being one of those young men. And a lot of times we find ourselves, I don't have the same background that somebody else does. But yet, as we go through this series, we're starting with a young man that had probably more privileges in life than 99% of the kids in Jerusalem at that time. Yeah. But yet, he didn't allow that to go to his head. He didn't let that dictate who he was going to be. He was his own person. Even though he was carried off in captivity, he still remained faithful unto God. But yet, we'll look at people throughout this these series, these lessons, that some of them were farmers. Some of them, they were, we look at all different types of people during this time. And some of them we'll actually look at when we get into Esther. She's actually, pretty close to this period at the end of what we consider the book of Daniel. But yet we find that this time frame, here is a young man, along with others that are being brought out of Jerusalem and carried into captivity, that though everyone else around him seems to just fall right into the way that it was there in Babylon, these 4 men makes a difference, and God blesses them for that difference.
That just proves to me how important it is to be, well, as Scripture says, seek the Lord while you're young.
Yes.
They got rooted and grounded at a young age in the faith, and you see where that stays with them.
Oh, yes.
Their entire life, even in another nation that's very pagan and very
pagan.
Much into idols and stuff.
Well, I mean, Solomon, we consider him one of the wisest men that there ever was. I mean, he prayed for God to give him wisdom. God gave him anything that he wanted, but yet he prayed for wisdom to be able to rule over the people. Mm-hmm. And, in the later years of his life, when he was writing, and the things that we have recorded, he tells us, remember the Creator in the days of thy youth. Why? Before the evil days come upon you. Mm-hmm. The older we get, the harder it is, because there's more things, there's more responsibilities, there's more things that we want. But yet we look at these young men that are exceptional when it comes to their faith.
Okay. Yeah.
And what we want to do is encourage others to be the same.
Yeah. And so what do we see once Daniel's taken captive? What's some of the first things we see is him, standing out as a faithful servant?
Well, one of the things that we see is as they make their way into Babylon, here is some young men that, Daniel's education probably was much more than like I said, some of the other ones, some of the other people of his age in Jerusalem. Because one of the things that we see in verse 4, not only did he say the king's seeds and princes, but in whom there was no blemish, but well favored, skillful in all wisdom. And boy, that's something we all need, is to be skillful in wisdom, young and old. Cunning in knowledge and understanding science, and the ability in them to stand in the king's palace, in whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. So the whole purpose of them being brought in there was, one, to learn the Chaldean language, but also the customs of the Chaldeans. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were brought in to be groomed to be the elite of this Babylonian city. And it looks like many of them went off in that direction. They chose something other than God. But yet here we see Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and it all starts with the provisions that they're given. Mm-hmm. In the scriptures we see that in verse 5, and the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat. So this is not only the king's meat, but of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. So for the next 3 years, this is very important, for the next 3 years. So if he comes in at 18, we're looking at 21. If he comes in at 13, we're looking at 16. So somewhere in this time frame, I feel safe in saying that by the time this chapter ends, he's 21 years or younger. Okay? I mean, he's in the prime of his life. Mm-hmm. And so, but during this time of a young age, he was offered some things that most people will never have the opportunity to be offered. He was offered the king's meat. I mean, if it was good enough for the king, then it was good enough for them. Mm-hmm. The drink that the king drank. And I mean, they were given the very best of provisions. And as a young adult, I mean, do we not want a nice house, a nice car, to wear nice clothing, make sure our hair looks good?
I mean, you're tempted with all these wonderful,
all
amazing
of these things.
things.
Yeah, I mean, here, if we would relay it to today, they were having prime rib and filet mignon every night. I mean, they were eating the best that Babylon had. And so there was an investment that the nation of Babylon was making into these people, okay, into these young men. And so, I take from that, here is a pagan king, a pagan nation, and yet they see something that is worth investing in. And I hope that we, as a older group of people, members of the Lord's church, that we will see the need to invest into our young people.
Absolutely.
And we, as the children of God, should already have that insight. But a lot of times we overlook that. And here is a pagan king, and of course he's trying to invest in them to be pagan themselves. Mm-hmm. But yet here these young men stand out in something in a great way. So we see as they come in that they were given this meat, but yet we find that Daniel proposed in verse 8 of the first chapter of Daniel, but Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not be defile himself. One of the first things I thought about when we first got into these scriptures is Moses. Now, Moses was 40 years old when he killed the Egyptian and left and went into Midian. We know that from the scriptures. But yet one of the things that the Hebrew writer says concerning Moses, that he chose rather to suffer the affliction of the children of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. He really desired to understand that it's better to have the goodness of God than it is to have all that the world has to offer. And so here is a young man. This was a 40-year-old man that realized that. Mm-hmm. Here is a 13, 14, 15, 16,
teenager.
17, teenager that has come to this conclusion. I don't want to defile myself. And so I'm not eating the king's meat. More than likely, this was probably a meat or an animal that was offered as a sacrifice to a pagan god. Probably maybe even been something that they was commanded not to eat. It may have been an unclean animal or something of that nature. But yet here David was, and the thing of it is I want us to realize peer pressure is a real thing. And we would all be lying to ourselves that it gets any easier. Okay, the older we get, we still have to endure peer pressure. We endure it from our co-workers. We endure it from our family members. We endure it from the people that we're around. We're all affected with peer pressure.
Yeah.
And so here Daniel was, and all the people, all the king's children, all the princes that was there, they no doubt was like, hey, this is not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Mm-hmm. I mean, they probably were living in a nice place in the palace or near the palace in the city. They probably had all the conveniences that anybody would ever want. And no doubt they were thinking, hey man, we're getting the very best there is to eat here. This is better than what I had in Jerusalem. Mm. But yet they were defiling their bodies. They were going against the commandments that God had already established long before that this ever took place. But Daniel did not want to. Daniel wasn't willing to defile himself. And so he asked the chief of the eunuch that he might be able to have something different. Now, I want to ask you a question, Jackie. If you went to a restaurant and they come out there with a big filet mignon cooked to perfection, okay? And then they bring you out a bowl of stew with some beans and some rice in it, and they told you choose. Which one would you choose?
Oh, I would choose the steak.
Would choose the steak.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Daniel didn't.
Yeah.
Okay. In the scriptures, it tells us that when this took place, that Daniel asked for the pulse. Mm-hmm. And what that was, it was a stew, a substance. Most time it was probably considered a mixture of different beans or with some grains and stuff in it. But it was a very healthy, very hearty meal. And so, this is what they asked for. They didn't want to defile their bodies by eating meat that either was unclean or offered to a false god. Daniel tried his very best to be faithful to God. And the thing of it is, a lot of times we're faced with so many obstacles in this life. It just seems like the devil or, the world, something is always being put before us that it just seems like sometimes it's impossible to try to be what we want, what God wants us to be. But when we give in to the Lord, He always provides a way.
Yeah, and the thought I just had about that is you wouldn't think being offered really good food would be a bad thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'd choose that steak in a heartbeat. But he knew, he had been taught back then that there were things you stay away from. And in the grand scheme of things, that wasn't like it didn't seem like a huge sinful act. It was, but if he would have partaken of that meat, that would have probably started him down a road of becoming more and more like the Babylonians, and
very much,
and the more he got into that, the further and further he would have gotten away from his faith and from God.
Very much, and that's one of the reasons we think that his parents and that he lived during the time of Josiah, because Josiah really was the only king up to this at this time that would have instructed the people in that manner. And so his parents took that to heart. They instilled it into Daniel. Daniel, being in a foreign country, being put in a place where he no doubt didn't want to be, he still remembered the teachings that were given to him. And so even though everybody else around him was eating the king's meat, they were drinking the king's drink, they were experiencing the same type of luxuries that Daniel was and all of these things, more than likely, some of them might have come and says, "Why aren't you eating this, Daniel?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, why aren't you eating the king's meat? And no doubt that brought, some resentment maybe from some of those people, some of his even peers, maybe even some of the friends that he played with as a young child, that why are you not good enough to eat of the king's meat? It has nothing to do with us being good or being better than someone else. It's the attitude of the heart. Daniel's heart was dedicated to be faithful unto the Lord.
And we can relate that to today, young teenagers, the same age people, the peer pressure.
Yes.
Why aren't you partaking in this, or why don't you do the activities that we're doing? And it might have been simple things. They might not have been gross sins, but it might have been led down that road too.
One little, it don't take but one step off of the side of a mountain to fall all the way down.
Now you say this a lot. It's so easy to get out of going to church.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to get in the habit of getting back into church.
And it's the same way with reading your scriptures, reading the Word of God. It's the same way with prayer. It's the same way with living a Christian life. It's so much easier just to give in to the things of this world and to the temptations of the flesh. It's much harder to be faithful to the Lord at first. But once you make that first step, God intervenes and He provides a way, though it might not be easy. But yet He provides a way, because the Bible tells us that there's not a temptation that come upon man that He's not made a way of escape. He's provided a way for us as children of God, those that have truly been born by the Spirit, born from above, born again, that we have an opportunity to walk in the newness of life. We have an opportunity to be Christ-like, to be Christian. We use the term Christian so much today that it really has no meaning. But when the term Christian was given to those at Antioch, they were living a Christ-like life. And it was given as an act of resentment. I mean, it wasn't, we use it today as a badge of honor. It wasn't that when it was given. And here Daniel is showing forth a Christian attitude long before there was ever called Christians, because he was being obedient to the things that God had commanded.
Well, I think this is a good break in our lesson 1, and we'll start with part 2 of Daniel in our next series.